How's it going, Joshua?
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Very good. I'm really glad to hear from you. I've been
Yeah.
looking forward to this for a month and a half. Before we get started, I was going to ask, I've never been to a Kansas prison. Have you
Mm.
heard from people in other states that Kansas might be different than nearby states or?
Yeah, very different. I knew guys who were on interstate compact from Florida, from Arkansas, Oklahoma, and some states seem to be a little bit more violent, but sometimes you have to take that with a grain of salt because everybody wants to sound like they're a tough guy and came from a super hard prison. And I'm sure some of them are much harder than Kansas prisons, but at one time, Lansing was in the top 10 most violent prisons in the United States. And I was there for a while. Um, so it's not a joke, but there are little things like incentive level systems, good time, things like that, that make a huge difference with how you do your time, like Missouri, when you get there, if you got the money, you can buy your electronics right off the bat. In Kansas, you start out on level one and you have to stay out of trouble for 4 months before you have a chance at buying your electronics. Or at least that's how it was when I was there. I think they might have changed that now.
No,
But there's
that's
little things like that that make a big difference in how you do your time. If you have a TV, it's easy to just sit down and do your time and keep yourself out of trouble. And then good time, in Kansas, we have 85%. Uh, you have to serve 85% of your time. You get 15% good time on violent crimes. Drug offenders can get 20% good time, whereas in a lot of states, you might get 50% good time. And so that's a big difference, too. It's not just the prison. I guess it would be part of the overall criminal justice system in the state. You know how people handle their sentencing and their convictions. If you have a state that uses a sentencing grid like Kansas, and then you have off-grid personal felonies, you might commit a crime and be looking at 25 to life. Whereas, you know, in another state, you'd have a set time on what you were looking at.
no, that's fascinating. The one I know the most in depth is Ohio, which is a bigger system than Kansas, but it's pretty mild. The prisons, they talk about one prison is violent, and you look and it's fighting, fist fights.
Mm,
That in a
yeah.
10-year period, you might have 10 murders in the whole state. And I don't know why they're so mild. And then I would go to California and look at their prisons,
Oh, yeah.
and the gang violence out there was just absurd.
Right. Well, it's like that a little bit in Kansas. Some prisons are definitely tougher than others, but I think in every prison I was, a resident at, we had murders that took place, and it was pretty violent. But Lansing was definitely the worst. Behind the walls in Lansing, they just rebuilt that prison, but I was there before they did that. I was in the old part of the prison. It was built in the 1860s, and I mean, you had guys getting stabbed, once a week at least, if not a couple times a week, either getting stabbed or they'd be hit in the head with a lock or a ballast out of a light or something like that. And that can be pretty rough.
Yeah.
But
I saw your video on how to take the sheets of styro or sorry, the plastic wrap and make
mm,
like a mace out of it. But
yeah,
at first, I was watching you do it. I don't think that'll work. And by the time you were done, I thought it's amazing.
yeah,
It's very dangerous.
yeah, they call that a baseball. And I
Yeah,
knew a
baseball.
guy in the hole. He was in segregation for protective custody. The hole is so overcrowded in Lansing. You have guys from the gang program that are in the hole. You have guys that are OSR, other security risks. That's basically they're in the hole for investigation. Then you have guys who are going to lockdown to long-term sake for committing a violent act or something like that. But you'll have them all in the same unit with PC guys and everything else. And there was a guy in there on PC, and he made one of those saran wrap maces. We call it a baseball in prison, but he knew someone was coming after him, so he made one, and he got out of the hole. He got off PC, went out to population, and smacked a dude in the head with it. Busted his head open, and went right back to the hole. He was looking at assault and battery, looking at a new charge over it. So,
Jeez.
yeah.
There is a guy in that I work with who's he's for 10 years he's been a correctional officer in a jail in Boston. And I was asking him about the lock in a sock, and he said they don't have locks, any padlocks on anything, but they use batteries. They'll just take a handful of D batteries, put them in a sock, and that's their number one weapon. I guess they just make do. Whatever
Yeah,
rule you
make
come up
do.
with, they'll find a way.
Yeah. My dad was in prison in California, and he came from Boston, actually. He was originally from Boston, and he went to California, got himself in a bunch of trouble out there. And when he was in prison, his thing was hard candy. He would walk around with a bag of hard candy and a sock in his pocket, and that's what he used. But like I said in the video, a lot of times those state socks, they're not good for that. The seams will rip on them, and then you're just left holding an empty sock, and that's no good in a fight.
That's it's you give so much information in your videos. It's great. Actually, I'm putting in the chat right now a link to your channel and your music channel. So as any of the my students want to visit your channel and catch up on things we may not have time for today, you have how many videos do you have now?
Over 50 videos now. I think I'm around 53 or 54 videos, and I try to make 3 videos per week. I kind of slacked on that last week. It wasn't so much that I was slacking, but I had some equipment problems. But I try to put out 3 videos a week, and I try to take recommendations and suggestions from my viewers. So if anyone ever wants to see a video about a particular topic or something like that, I'm more than happy to make a video about it. I actually have a video coming out probably tonight or tomorrow morning about music in prison and how we had access to guitars and stuff like that, and how we actually threw concerts within the prison, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, Leo, the student in chat, he just asked, or he just said he's a fellow guitar player. So maybe that's a good place to start. Is when did you get into playing guitar? Because I watched your music channel, and it's incredible.
Thank you. I started playing, I want to say it was late 2008. I played music on the streets before I went to prison, but I was a saxophone player. And I got to prison, and I went from Ellsworth to El Dorado. And when I got to El Dorado, they had acoustic guitars that we could check out on the yard. So I wanted to learn how to do that. I was in prison, and I wanted to fill my time with productive things and positive things. And I felt like music was a way to do that. So I started checking out the guitar, and I had a friend named Freedom. Oddly enough, that was his real name, his legal name. He was doing a 40-year sentence for murder. And he sat down and he started teaching me how to play guitar. We were playing together for about a month. And then I started showing myself how to play. I took the basic concepts that I learned from playing the saxophone and just applied it to the guitar. I practiced every day. I practiced my heart out till my fingers bled. And there was a band room in the prison. We had to be level 2 or 3, so we had to be out of trouble to get in the band room. And we had to find a spot with a band that, we could fill, because there was a schedule for the band room. Different groups were in there on different days, so you had to get in with a group. And I got in with a guy playing bass, and gradually I worked my way up to playing rhythm guitar with a metal band in there. So it really took off. And I did that for a couple of years, and I was a part of a nonprofit organization that taught classes in the prison. And we started a music class. So I started teaching guitar, and I did that for about 7 years.
It's great. I mean, I tried to play guitar once a long time ago in high school, and I couldn't get very far. So I could do some power chords and just didn't have the knack. But you can tell when someone has really dedicated time to it that it actually sounds like music. And so congratulations.
Thank you.
I hope that takes off for you too. Like your other channel is starting to, I see some of your videos are getting tons of views, comments immediately. And the music channel needs to pick up, but you definitely should be picking up. It just needs to be advertised, I think.
Yeah, and I need some more content on there. I have a couple of music videos that I've been shooting recently that I'm going to put up. Those are going to be very, very cool. And it's just something that I am passionate about. If I don't make a bunch of money off my music, it's not a big deal. I'm going to make music either way, and I'm going to put out videos either way. So I think the key is to do something that you love to do and you're passionate about.
Absolutely. It's now that I think most of my students are here, we have 40 in the class, but they sometimes come in a little later. So we can go ahead and get started, and I'll just introduce you. Everyone, this is Eric Swanson. He has a YouTube channel. I put the link to it in the chat. And he's going to tell you about his life, and what it was like for him to serve a sentence in prison in Kansas, and then what it's like after prison. And so here you get a chance to talk to someone and ask questions in the chat, or whenever he's finished telling his story, you can ask him some questions, and he can tell you a whole lot more about what prison life is like than I can just from, books and visits. He actually lived there. So this is a great opportunity, and I want to thank him again for coming. And please go right ahead and tell us all about yourself.
My name's Eric, and I'm from Kansas. I wasn't born here, but I grew up here, and I grew up in kind of a rough home, I guess you would say. It was kind of a abusive environment, and some things happened that shouldn't happen to any kid, for sure. From my mother being addicted to drugs to my father being physically abusive, it was rough. I was a good kid. I got in some trouble here and there, but you know, I wasn't crazy. I was just a typical teenager. I think everybody who's young at one point or another has a tendency to get into some trouble. But when I was a teenager, I I was pretty unhappy with the way things were at my house. My mother being addicted to opiates and my father being abusive. I fought with my father almost every day. And something happened one day that I felt pretty strongly about. There's a guy who was a friend of mine, and I'm going to say allegedly on this to avoid a lawsuit, but this guy had allegedly molested two little girls that I knew. And I took him out in the woods and I beat him up and I shot him. And the next day, and I did this with two other people. The next day, I was arrested for attempted murder and aggravated kidnapping and several other charges. They kind of stacked the charges up on me. They arrested me. I went to the juvenile detention center, and eventually I was adjudicated. I was charged as an adult, and I was in county jail for quite a while, almost a year, not quite, um, probably about 8 months or so. And I got out on bond for about a month or two of that, and I ended up getting a plea agreement. They said that if me and my co-defendants pled to aggravated kidnapping, if we pled no contest to that, we would, be free of the other charges. That's what we all did because we were looking at a lot of time. We were looking at facing the rest of our lives in prison. And for me, being 17 years old and thinking about spending the rest of my life in prison, that was pretty tough. So I jumped on the plea agreement just as my two co-defendants did. And, a few weeks later, we were, on our way to prison. So I got to prison. It was, an adult prison, and I was 17. I went through RDU, which is a diagnostics unit. And that had some challenges to it. A diagnostics unit is a place where they give you assessments and evaluations to figure out your security level and what kind of programs you need to take while you're in prison to help rehabilitate you and prepare you for reintegration when you get out. So I went through all that. I got out of RDU. I went to Ellsworth, and then I was there for a short time. I got in trouble. I got in a fight with an officer, and I went to El Dorado And El Dorado is a medium security facility, and it is a max security facility. Ellsworth was just a medium facility, um, but they didn't have any bed space for max when I got to El Dorado, so they made me high medium by exception. And when I was there, I was pretty happy. I was doing very positive things with my time. I was taking classes. I started taking college classes. I was involved with music. I got involved with a nonprofit organization called the XLJCs, and we had different classes that we facilitated in the prison. We donated to charity and things like that. And it really helped me get my footing and find who I was. And I was involved with that until 2015 when I left that prison. After 2015, I went to minimum, and I was only there for a couple of months. I couldn't stand a minimum security facility, which was Winfield. That's where I was housed. The officers treated inmates a little bit differently, and I wasn't used to that. In a medium security prison, a lot of the officers know that the inmates there are there for a long time and they don't have a lot to lose. And they treat you with a lot of respect, or at least in Kansas, they do. There's always going to be a few officers that are difficult. And granted, a lot of inmates are difficult. I'm not going to spin you a one-sided yarn here. There's a lot of guys in prison that are difficult to deal with, not just for officers, but other inmates. And when I got to Winfield, it wasn't like that. The officers were much more abrasive, and I wasn't used to it, and I didn't cope with it well. I got into it with an officer, and I threatened him, and I got sent to the hole. I got a class 1 R1 write-up, which in Kansas, that means you're going to do whole time, and you are going to go straight to maximum security, and you're going to be there for at least 3 years. So off I went to Lansing, and I was in the hole, and there was a gang up there, the Aryan Brotherhood. You might have heard of them. And they had some problems with me. We had some unresolved issues because they tried to beat up a friend of mine when I was in El Dorado, and I kind of stepped in. Well, they remembered that, and I got to Lansing, and they green-lighted me. And so I knew that someone was going to come after me. Someone had a hit on me. And I was going to be prepared. So I had a weapon, and I was going to go out and get into it with these guys if it came to that. Well, the night that I was leaving, as I was leaving the hole, I got caught with said weapon. I was actually working on the weapon, and my neighbor in the hole was supposed to be watching out for the officers doing their rounds. But he was high. He was all messed up. He forgot all about watching for the cops. And so an officer walked right up on me while I was sharpening this thing on my floor. And they didn't know why I had the weapon. They didn't know what I was going to use it for. And I wasn't volunteering that information. So they put me under investigation. They OSR'd me in segregation, and they kept me there for a year. There's a lot of speculation because of how I left Winfield. I got into it with an officer. They thought I might be trying to attack an officer or something like that. So I was in seg for a year. Initially, as soon as they caught me with that weapon, they put me in an MRA cell. And in Kansas, and the prison system here, an MRA cell is basically a slam cell with nothing but a concrete slab and a toilet. You don't have control over the lights, nothing like that. You don't even have your clothes that you would normally have in the hole. You have, your underwear, and that's it. You don't have any hygiene items even. And it's a slam cell. So you have a door to your cell, but there's a door on the other side of that, and there's a wall on both sides of your cell. So you can't pass items between the cells. You can't really talk to your neighbors that well, and you can't really see out because you have a solid steel door on the other side of your main door for your cell. And, they usually had that either closed or partially open, so you couldn't really see anything. But after being in the hole for a year, I was moved to a mental health unit. When I was in SEG, I stopped eating. I was tired of being in SEG. I didn't want to be OSR'd. I didn't want to be there. I wanted out. And I went on a hunger strike several times. In the month of May of that year, I think it was 2017, I went 15 days without eating. So I lost a bunch of weight, and uh, I wasn't doing very well. And my health was failing. I wasn't in a good place mentally, and they moved me to a mental health unit. However, the mental health unit was a lot like SEG in a lot of ways. We still didn't have contact with other people. We didn't have a lot of time out of our cells. We were in the old part of Lansing, which was built in the 1860s, and it's kind of archaic in its design, I guess you could say. The cells were 6 by 8, not much room in there. They were falling apart. And I don't know, it takes its toll on you after a while. And even in the mental health unit, it was the same conditions. So, you couple that with not being out of your cell and not having a lot of contact with others, it's tough. But at this point, I was on the tail end of my sentence. And the outlet that I found there was with the activity specialist for the mental health unit, Mr. Richards. He had a music group for the guys who were mental health inmates. And the mental health unit is kind of like a mental hospital within the prison, but it's still a prison. It's just run like a mental hospital. And there's different levels to it. You have True 1 and True 2, depending on the severity of your mental illness. But for both True units, they had a music program. And I talked to Mr. Richards after I had spoken to one of my counselors, and he suggested, that I get involved with the music program, and I did. And I ended up teaching music classes in the mental health unit, which was the only time I was allowed out of my cell. But it was kind of a godsend in many ways. And we ended up playing 2 concerts in the mental health unit, which was really cool. The last one that I did was the day before I was released. I played a concert, and I was the guitarist for everybody's set. You had different groups that played at the concert, and every single set I was a guitarist. And afterwards, the warden of the prison, Sam Klein, he was the warden at the time. I don't know who the warden is now. He came up to me and he shook my hand, and he said that he really enjoyed the show, and he said thank you, and that meant a lot to me. But then I got out of prison and reentry wouldn't help me very much. I wasn't getting on disability when I got out, and I had more than $500 on my books. So according to the policies in place in Kansas, I didn't qualify for any of their programs. It was basically find a place to go. You're on your own. And I had no place to go. So I went to my mother's house because I had, nowhere else. And I moved in with her, and I found myself a job within the first month of being out. But it didn't last. I ended up getting kicked out of my mother's house. Like I said, there was a lot of abuse growing up. My mother's pretty rough around the edges sometimes. And we got into it one night, and I didn't want to live like that. We had a argument over Facebook of all things, and she got mad and she locked me out of the house when it was about 13 degrees outside. So I got in my car and I left, and I was homeless. I ended up losing my job. I lived in my car in hotel rooms for, I don't know, a while. And I eventually moved back down to my hometown, and I moved in with a girl I had dated in high school. I moved in with her and her mother. Her mother has a great big farm, and I figured I would live out there for a bit and worked on the farm until I got my house situated, which I owned a house. I actually had my father's old house. When he passed away and my mom moved out, that house got signed over to me. My mom owed a bunch of money on the house, and I helped her pay off the money that was owed on it, pay off the taxes, and in return, she signed it over to me. However, it sat abandoned for about 7 years, so I couldn't just move back in. I had to get it fixed up, and I'm still working on the house today. But eventually, I did move in. It was rough at first. There were times that I didn't have any heat, I didn't have running water. It was rough, but you just have to push through it. I was determined, though, to keep trying. I found myself another job down here. I did carpentry for about a year, building houses, and it was a new skill for me. I didn't know how to do carpentry. And, it worked out pretty well. And last year I got injured, so I wasn't able to continue doing that. But I started concentrating on my YouTube channel because during this time I had been documenting my experiences with my YouTube channel. I didn't expect to make a bunch of money, but I wanted to kind of document some of the things that I was going through coming from a pretty lengthy prison sentence. I was in for 11 years. I was sentenced to 13 years. But I wanted to document what that was like coming out here to the free world after being locked up all that time. And, when I got locked up, I was 17. So in 2018, when I walked out, I had never lived in the free world as an independent adult ever. I didn't know how to do taxes. I didn't know anything about the free world. I could survive and thrive in a prison environment immediately. But out here, this was completely different, so, but I've been working on it. And last, last month I got married and we have a baby on the way. So, I'm getting my house together. My YouTube channel is taking off.